Today is the day you've been waiting for all summer, the first day of school. You've set up your classroom furniture, you've decorated your walls and your door, you have all your classroom supplies and materials lined up and ready. Now you're just waiting for your students to walk through your door for the first time. What you do next will set the tone for the rest of the school year, and is quite possibly the most important thing you do for the entire year. Classroom management is usually at the top of most teachers' challenges. We all want one thing: for students to do what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And no, don't take this as a master of puppets scenario. That's not how I look at it at all. This year, I want you to look at your classroom in a different way. I want you to look at your classroom as a microcosm of society, a mini community, if you will. What are some of the building blocks of any society? Well, you've got the government and law enforcement, which is you. You've got the citizens, which are your students. And you've got the cultural norms and the law. And I'll get to that in a minute. In any functional society, each member must do their part so that everything flows positively, and we have social order. In this case, the students must do their part, and the teachers must also do their part. And when we have social order in the classroom, we have maximized learning. Classroom management is actually a pretty simple formula. It's clear expectations plus consistency. Clear expectations plus consistency. So let's go back to that moment on the first day of school, when your students enter your classroom for the first time. What do? Well, first you have to ask yourself, when my students walk through the door every day after today, how do I expect them to behave? Do I expect them to walk around the classroom, chit-chatting for several minutes, taking forever to find their seats and get out their materials? Or do I expect them to find their seats quickly and quietly, with their materials on their desks ready to go? I'm going to go ahead and assume you probably prefer the latter. Well, if that's your expectation, then you better make sure you let them know. On the first day of school, you'll want to greet your students at your door. And they'll probably be all excited and hyper, loud and energetic. And although this is not necessarily a bad thing, you don't want this influx of energy every day while they enter your classroom. So when they enter your classroom and do their thing, you give them clear instructions and say to them, "Welcome to my classroom. Before we begin, I need you to all quietly exit the classroom and re-enter. This time, I want you to enter quietly, find your desk right away, and take a seat and get your things out." Their reaction will probably be raised eyebrows and several, "Are you serious? Is this guy for real?" With a straight face, you tell them, "I'm very serious," and repeat your instructions again while you open the door for them to exit. They'll all exit your classroom and then re-enter. If you're lucky, you'll only have to do this once or twice, but sometimes you'll have to do it several times until they get it right. Don't give up. Keep telling them to exit your class and re-enter until they get it right. For them, this is a clear message of what you expect them to do every day when they enter your classroom. But this isn't only for the first day. They might forget on the second or third day. So remind them again. Please exit my classroom and re-enter quickly and quietly, find your desks, and get your things out ready for the lesson. Keep this up for the entire week or until you get the results you want. Clear expectations plus consistency. For the rest of the year, your students will know that when they enter your class, they must enter quickly and quietly and get their materials out ready to learn. Earlier in this episode, I mentioned the law as being part of any functional society. The law and social norms are what dictate the actions of the citizens of any society. Similarly, it is up to you to create your classroom culture, and every classroom must have clear classroom rules. You can call them the rules, you can call them the norms, you can call them the law. You can get creative with what you want to call your classroom rules, but nonetheless, they must exist. While a classroom is ultimately a dictatorship, no matter what anybody says, it's always good to inject some democracy every once in a while. So the first activity of the year is to have your students help you create the classroom rules. This is great because that way, your students won't feel like you are imposing your rules on them, but instead, they're following the social norms that they themselves are creating. And trust me, that does make a difference. So the first activity is to create your classroom norms. Divide your students into 3 or 4 smaller groups, maybe more, maybe less, depending on your class size. You'll want to take a few minutes to explain the activity to them, how a society functions, the importance of laws and norms, and the goal of having a functional society. In this case, a classroom where everybody feels safe and everybody gets a fair chance to learn. And then ask them in your own way, what are some expectations that we should have as a class so that we may have a safe learning environment for everyone? Write the question on the board. Give them several minutes to discuss in their groups and to write down their answers. On a side note, you can take this opportunity to present another of your expectations. Time management. I discussed this, so go check that out. If you give them 10 minutes, it's not 13 minutes. If you give them 3 minutes, it's not 7 minutes. If they ask you for more time, respectfully decline. This will teach them that when you say 10 minutes, you expect them to be done in 10 minutes. Stay consistent. I always used to tell my students, I'm sorry, but I don't control time. Time controls me. Back to our activity. After they discuss in their groups and write down what they've come up with, have one representative from each group read their answers out loud to the class. As they read, write down their answers on a poster board. Hopefully, they'll mention things like respect, personal space, personal belongings, responsibility, the usual. If you don't get the answers you were hoping for, guide them in the direction you want them to go. When you're done and you're satisfied with all their answers, put the poster board up in your classroom for the remainder of the year, as a reminder to you and your students of the expectations that they came up with themselves. If and when one of your students does something out of line or against your expectations, just point to the poster board and remind them, hey, you guys came up with this, not me. Please try to follow your own rules. And on a final note, just like a society, norms can change over time. And so can your classroom rules. So feel free to update your list as the days go by, adding something, removing something, or changing something. Setting the tone from day one is crucial to developing a positive and safe learning environment in your classroom. Remember that the teacher is the one who is responsible for creating the classroom culture, whether positive or negative. Make sure your expectations are clear and your students know exactly what you expect of them. Remain consistent. In other words, don't break your own rules. For example, if you expect your students to enter your classroom quickly and quietly, then this is what they should be doing every day. If for some reason, later in the year, things become relaxed and your students forget, and they come into your classroom rowdy and chit-chatty, feel free to repeat the exit and re-enter exercise with them again to remind them. But the responsibility really mostly falls on you. If you relax with your expectations and give too much slack or allow your students to break a rule here and there, your expectations become hazy. If you allow your class to break a rule, this sends a confusing message to your students that you're not really serious about your expectations, and that will open up a whole can of worms that you want to avoid. Remember that you are the captain of your classroom, and the students look to you for guidance. It is up to you to maintain your expectations and classroom rules, so that the students will follow in suit. Don't expect them to behave as you want them to if you keep making exceptions, because number one, they'll always expect you to make exceptions, so they'll continue to try to bend the rules. Number two, your expectations have now become hazy and unclear, so now they don't really know how to act or behave. And number three, if you're not taking the rules seriously, don't expect them to take the rules seriously either. You are responsible for following the rules as much or even more than your students. This should set the tone and create your positive classroom culture for the rest of the year.